thought or two as we get started, and Pastor Brent's going to come up and preach, and it's a presidential address. In Exodus chapter 14, verse 21 and 22, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night, the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind, and it turned into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That would have been an exciting and exhilarating time for the Israelites, eh? I mean, they are standing there on the edge of the birth of a nation. They've come through, they're on the other side of the Red Sea. They're free from captivity, and what's in front of them is the promise of national formation. There's purpose. God has called them out. He set them apart. And as I was thinking about this week, I thought, man, that's actually what I've missed the most about being together with our ARC family, or not having the chance to be together, is that we get to carve out a couple of days like this. We come together from all across the country, called out of our churches and our neighborhoods, the pressure of your context, the pressure of your team, your family situation, all these things. We get called out from those environments, and we get to recalibrate and realize again, just for a couple of days, that what we're doing, regardless of how big your church is, or how old your church is, or how many people show up on a Sunday, or how many people you report show up on a Sunday, that we're all here because God is not done with Canada. There is, like the Israelites, standing on the edge. They've come through, they're on the other side, and they're looking ahead to the future with promise and potential. Every time we gather and are called out of our regular routine, and we get together and we focus again on the fact that God has a plan for our nation, we are on the edge of promise and potential. Today's about promise and potential because God is still building his church. Jesus still died for every Canadian. There's a promise and a purpose over the people of God, over you as a leader, over your team, over your staff, over your city, over the people that left you, over the people that quit on you, over the people that haven't come yet. There's a promise. And each of us have a role and responsibility to play. And I love loving Canada with the people in this room. I love loving Canada with you. I think it's my favorite thing. And so when we think of the Red Sea crossing, we might be tempted to reduce our understanding of the events to simply a one-night march across divinely divided waters, which it was, but it also represents so much more, because it's not just that they went through the sea on dry ground, which is incredible, but the Israelites had been through a lot. It says they went through it. They're coming out of Egypt, but they're bringing with them all the baggage, the extra weight, the carry-on for $50 a bag of generational trauma. What the Israelites went through was traumatic. Rejection, isolation, physical abuse, psychological manipulation and oppression, 400 years of slavery, 430 years of being displaced, their identity under attack. God's silent, no direction, no purpose, only seemingly empty promises of better days that faded. They echoed further and further in the distance with every passing generation. When I think of trauma, my mind goes to like blunt force trauma. You know, when I was a kid and played hockey, I don't know how many concussions I had. I think it was a lot, but we didn't care then. You'd skate to the bench days and your coach would be like, you ready? Uh-huh. And you're playing like the bottom level pee-wee hockey, you know? Nobody cared. Physical trauma, the severity of an injury. Someone suffered a blow, impact, a strike to part of their body. You get physical trauma, serious enough, you've got to go get it treated. You've got to go get it looked at. And so when you consider what we do now to protect against physical trauma and drama, and how we would care for somebody who suffered physical trauma. Keep that image in your mind when we remember that trauma isn't just physical, that it can be psychological too. That there can be incidents, events that strike your soul to the place where we get wounded and hurt. And so verse 22, when it says they went through, it's like this good news, bad news verse, because the bad news is they had to go through it. And it would be impossible to unpack the layers and levels and degrees of trauma that the Israelites had suffered while exposed to Egyptian rule. So that's the bad news. The good news is, you know this, you're preachers, they went through it. And now they're on the other side. And God is going to establish his people, and he's building a nation, and he's going to fulfill a promise. And so in all likelihood today, even like with the comforts of our Western world, there's probably not a lot of us that carried physical trauma into this room. But it's probable, likely, maybe even a guarantee that everybody here has been through it at some level. At some level, you've had to navigate the complexity of our current world situation. At some level, you've had to deal with loss, grief, pain, pressure, and there have been good moments too, but if it's like our experience, it's been like highs and lows and very little in between. There's been unmet expectations, there's been betrayal, there's been abandonment, there's been frustration, there's been hurt. And so we've all experienced trauma at some level, maybe chronic trauma, where it's this repeated exposure to the same thing and it wears you down and your soul starts to carry a wound. Maybe it's acute trauma, where you look back and there's this one moment that like hurt you deep and it's been hard to shake. Maybe it's complex trauma, like it's everything. Family's crazy, church is crazy, staff is crazy, city's crazy, finances are crazy, marriage is crazy. So that's the bad news. I got more bad news. When we say yes to leading, you say yes to having a target on your back. We say yes to a battle. We say yes to a fight that you engage in that nobody else is going to understand. You say yes to spiritual warfare where you get up in the middle of the night and you pray for people that will never say thank you, may never know. You cry out for a city that doesn't seem to care for you back. You bleed and pray and lose sleep for your church. You say yes to a price. You say yes to a sacrifice. We say yes to a cost and a conflict, and our souls take hits. And there are signs. The Israelites, they're technically free, right? They're out of Egypt, but the Egyptians are coming. The instrument of their trauma was still chasing them into their promise. And it can feel that way sometimes. It's almost like some leadership PTSD, where the moment is past, but there are side effects. We withdraw, we stop being vulnerable, we settle into isolation. Emotionally, socially, we start to detach. Maybe it's flashbacks. Maybe like you're replaying how you felt in a moment, a situation, a conversation over and over and over again. It's lack of rest. You have a hard time. You might sleep, but you're not resting. It's lack of drive, purpose, motivation. You're easily triggered. Maybe you've established some new habits, but they're not great habits. You're coping with trauma from a season. A change of scenery doesn't make it better. When your soul has been traumatized, you can give the impression that everything's good on the outside, but you're still fighting battles on the inside that nobody else can see. That's the bad news. The good news is that we're here right now. That's good news. That we're all, we have been on the front lines of leadership, and as a leader, you've taken some hits, but you're here now. We're in the room now. We've gone through it, and what you went through looked different than what I went through. And we coped differently, and we lashed out differently, and we posted differently, and we processed differently. Come on, somebody, you don't have to mute me anymore. Listen, we've had differences because we've handled things differently. But what matters is that we're here now. What matters is that there's a nation in front of us. They are desperate for Jesus. And so before Moses can lead the nation into formation, before they can possess promises, before they can move on from the spot where they crossed over, God gives them an instruction. And he says in verse 26, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. And not one of them remained, but the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Moses, you made it through, but I want you to stop right here and look back over the sea. Now, this is the same instruction that he gave Moses before they crossed. You remember chapter 14, verse 13 to 16. Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent. And then God's like, who told you only to be silent? You need to move. You want to see my salvation? Verse 16 is the instruction. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea. And so the first time Moses did this, it enabled the deliverance of God's people. Because he was obedient and lifted his hand over the sea, the waters parted. They went through something they never should have been able to get through. He raised his hand for their deliverance. They transitioned from slave to free. They crossed over. They were delivered. They were captives, but now they're free from the oppression. It's significant. But on the other side, it doesn't seem necessary to me. Like, God, why do you need Moses to raise his hand back out? Like before they crossed, you said, don't stop here, keep moving. And now you're saying, don't move forward until you've stopped and looked back. Like, we know this, he didn't need Moses to raise his hand. God could have flooded the waters back in and taken out the Egyptians, and the Israelites could have been well on their way. But then it hit me, listen, the crossing over, Moses said, you will see the salvation of the Lord. The crossing over was not the complete salvation work. The crossing over was part of it, but the complete work of salvation is not just that we survive and get by. It's not just that we make it through. God wanted Moses to raise his hand again and watch while the waters flowed back over the enemy that had tracked and taunted and haunted. The complete work of salvation is not only the deliverance of the Israelites, but it is the forever destruction and defeat of the enemy that had been hunting them down. The death, the pain, the loss, everything they had suffered, buried in the sea with the water. Moses, I need you to watch. Moses, I need you to pause. I know you're ambitious. I know you're a leader. I know you got things you want to accomplish, but I need you to stop right here and look back and watch and see. Before you keep going, before you build a nation, just pause for a second. Look back on where you crossed. Look back, take a moment, Moses, in the here and the now before you move forward. Moses, I need you to watch while I take care of the very thing that traumatized you. I need you to watch while I make sure that what traumatized you in one season cannot touch you in the next. I need you to watch. Do you know that over 32 times in Scripture, the Israelites and even the New Testament church are told to refer back, hey, remember the Red Sea. Remember the Red Sea. 32 times. Remember when you crossed over? When they were facing persecution and oppression and frustration and pain and trial, there are authors and leaders and apostles and prophets and songwriters who kept saying, come back to that moment. Don't forget when you crossed over, where you were delivered and your enemy was destroyed. And I'm looking at it, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but I was up really late trying to make sure my Hebrew was right. And the word salvation that Moses uses when he says, the can see the salvation the Lord will give you today. It's made up in Hebrew of 5 Hebrew letters. This is what those letters are. This is what they mean. The letter He, which means revelation. The letter Ayin, which means to see. The letter Vav, which means nail or spike. The letter Shin, which means steadfast. And the letter Yod, which means hand. We're talking about 1,500 years before Jesus. And Moses, without understanding the prophetic weight of what he says, is I want you to see the revelation of the nail-pierced hand. I want you to look back and see the revelation of the nail-pierced hand. Not just any hand. It's a steadfast hand. It's a strong hand. It's a hand that's not too short to save. It's an unshakable hand. It's an unchanging hand. It's the son of the right hand. His hand is mighty in power, and he is seated on the throne of his father David, where he reigns over the house of Jacob forever and ever. And of his kingdom there will be no end. Of his power there is no limitation. Of his grace there is no expiration. He has defeated every enemy and placed him under our feet. Under our feet. And over again, as they looked back to the place where they crossed, it wasn't just about one night making it through on dry ground. It was about looking back and seeing the revelation of the nail-pierced hand. Look back again. When it's tough, look back and see the deliverance and the destruction. Look back and see, I got you here, I'll get you there. Listen, this, I believe, is a challenge to leaders of the church in Canada. Before we move forward in our conference, before we can move forward in what God has called us to in our local context, before we can dream about the nation, we need to pause and see, put our ambition aside just for a moment, and see again the revelation of the nail-pierced hands. Conferences are great, but don't forget the cross. Outreach strategy is great, don't forget the cross. Writing new worship music is great, don't forget the cross. Your team is great and your staff is great. Your city's great, your next sermon is great, but don't forget the cross. Don't forget why we're here. Don't forget what unites us. Don't forget the revelation of the nail-pierced hand. His work is complete. You did not just survive. We did not just cross over. We did not just make it from Sunday to Sunday. We have been delivered. Our enemy has been defeated. And the thoughts that have hunted you down, and the fear and the insecurity and the worry has been broken on the cross. We don't need to look over our shoulder. There is healing for every traumatized soul, healing for every leader, healing for every volunteer, healing for every pastor, but it's only found in the revelation of the nail-pierced hand. It's in the cross of Jesus Christ. He is the one